There is a well-known saying that goes always give the hardest job to the laziest person because they will find the easiest way to do it. What is the best real-life example to this you have seen? A programmer outsourced his own job overseas, paying Chinese programmers 1/5 of his salary to write code for him while he spent his days surfing Reddit and watching cat videos. His performance reviews praised him for clean, well-written code and called him the best developer in the building. This reminded me of an Onion video where eventually the outsourced workers outsourced the outsourced work. A bit unrelated, but there's a news story about a hitman who outsourced his job to another hitman, who in turn outsourced his job to another hitman. The third hitman also outsourced the job, and, the fourth one also hired another guy to do it. In the end there were 5 assassins and the target lived, because the last one tattled. LMAO. I once was a temp at a tiny office on a construction site in around 2003. I was only there for one day, while the regular person was on some training. They sat me down and told me that I just needed to copy all these numbers from one program to another. So I selected them, hit Ctrl-C and Ctrl-V. They stared at me. Turns out about 60% of this woman's time had been spent manually typing numbers from one place to another. Boss hated Excel to the point where he didn't want us using formulas because you can't trust them to be right, so we needed to do all the calculations by hand or on a calculator. He would give me a spreadsheet once or twice a week that required, let's say, 45 seconds to do, but maybe 7 hours by hand, and he told me to go to Starbucks or something and crank it out. He thought that, since I pasted as values and he couldn't see the formulas, that I did it by hand when really I just did it in 45 seconds, sent an email on delay for 7 hours, and studied for the next semester. Dude was the poster boy for failing upwards in your career. First day of internship he told me with a straight face he was a work harder not smarter kinda guy. I worked a summer at a mortgage company as an assistant to the underwriters. My only job was printing documents and then hole punching them to put in folders. They had a super fancy Xerox printer that basically did my entire job for me, but the underwriters at this company didn't know how to click through printer settings to make the machine hole punch as it was being printed. I showed them how to do it, and they resisted it super hard, like they didn't trust it. IDK. So I got to keep my job, but what was supposed to take me all day literally took me about 20 to 30 minutes first thing in the morning. So they started assigning me real tasks, and even offered to keep me on to eventually become an underwriter too. Because I was so sharp, that is, I knew how to use the very expensive printer they already had. I was just about to start grad school, so I had to politely decline, but I'm pretty sure they didn't hire someone to replace me when I left. TL, doctor, they had a printer that already did my job for me, but didn't know how to use it. I showed them. Maybe not the most impressive story here, but I thought it was a great sidestep of effort nonetheless. Co-worker of mine had to get rid of a smaller junk fiberglass boat with no trailer. Our other co-workers are all telling him how much time and money he's going to need to spend to get rid of it, and he's just saying, "Oh, is that so?" He took off one day and sat down on his lawn with a cooler of beer. That day was garbage day. Inevitably, the trash guys roll up. He hands each of them a cold beer and says, "Hey boys, got $50 for each of you if you help me out real quick." They fed the entire 12-foot boat into the packer, crushing 2 feet at a time. Growing up we didn't have large stuff pickup, mattresses, old appliances, that sort of thing, so anytime my dad needed something gone like that, he'd sit it by the trash can, and on trash day he'd have me put a 6-pack on the pile while I waited for the school bus, as the trash ran within minutes of the bus. It never failed. Whatever was piled up was gone. I used to process HSA claims around 10 plus years ago. One system we had to use back then was an old as hell terminal program that took 4 line items per page. That's it. For a usual claim, no big deal. Not too hard to keep track of things over 2 or 3 pages for a longer claim. Most fit on one. However, we had the dreaded showbox claims. This was the person who saved up every receipt all year in a metaphorical showbox and sent everything in once a year to empty their account. We hated them. dozens or hundreds of line items totaling thousands of dollars. Just because you only had $500 in your HSA doesn't mean we get to stop there. If you sent in $4,000 in receipts, I gotta account for it all. Totally killed your numbers for the day, and they tracked claims per hour religiously. The main issue was double checking that everything added up right when you were done entering it. At 4 items a page it took forever to tally. So, I made an Excel sheet. It was laid out so I could enter every single line, then run a macro that would calculate the needed totals and dump all the text to a text file, formatted exactly so I could select 4 items at a time and paste them directly into the terminal window from the default starting cursor position, and every field would fill in automatically. Copy, paste, next, copy, paste, next, copy, paste, next, etc etc. It easily halved my entry times, with way less work. Finding any typos was much easier. I just had to look at one column organized sheet instead of scrolling through God knows how many pages of terminal text. It was great. I showed it to my manager, so the rest of my team could use it. She was horrified I would use something like that, as no human was double checking as they went along. This despite demonstrable improvements to my error rates on large claims. After I started using it, she ordered me to stop using it and forbid anyone in her team from automating any part of their job at all. I kept using it for all of the 2 months I stayed there after that. I had some of the highest claim per hour numbers and lowest error rates on her team. I never developed any more tools for them. Fuck her. Worked as a cashier during the holiday season back when I was 16. The supermarket was selling drinks by the boxes, and at that time, we only had barcode scanners that was at the front of the computer. No gun type scanners existed. I was lazy and didn't want to carry boxes up to the scanner. So I politely asked my customers if I could carve out the barcode from their box to scan and keep. Some agreed, some didn't want to, but eventually I managed to amass all the barcodes needed, labeled them and kept them in a file for easy reference. Apparently some other cashier got green-eyed at my smart move and complained to the chief cashier, who promptly lectured me on bullshit alert, how it's dangerous for me to scan such barcodes as I might scan the wrong things. She told me to throw it all away and carry the boxes like I was meant to. I mean, I was young so I could, but the other cashiers were older and some were elderly and needed the customers themselves to help carry the boxes to the scanner. But whatever, I guess jealousy trumps common sense. I work in a semi-warehouse environment and we have to track where items are at all times. When we move X item from location A to location B, we had to type out the to and from locations. We do this hundreds of times a shift. I went online to a free barcode maker website and spent about 20 minutes making location barcodes. I save hours a day by scanning barcodes. I did something like that when I worked at a movie rental store. The computers made you sign back in after something like 15 seconds of inactivity. It was so unproductive. After a week or 2 at the job, I bought some stickers and printed barcodes onto the back of my badge. One barcode had my ID, the other had my password. I could scan them both in a second or 2. I avoided telling my boss cause I didn't want to get in trouble, but eventually he found out, and when he did, he had me print barcodes for everyone. Just thinking about that computer system makes me mad, and it's been over a decade. I used to deliver beer. I did not like delivering beer. I may have ended up with 30 stops in a day, including deliveries that the customer would call into our office for. I used to bring extra beer and blank invoices with me on the truck to prevent having to drive back to my warehouse to deliver one keg to a place that I was currently across the street from 7 years later. The driver of that route is still doing that. In high school we had to do 4 book reports every year. A friend of mine did his on each Lord of the Rings books and The Hobbit freshman year and turned in the same 4 book reports for the rest of his time in high school. You switched English teachers every year so no one ever caught on. I was never brave enough to try the same thing. I was working a kids chess summer camp with this guy who just talked down pot like you wouldn't believe. Still a far better chess player than me. One day, the kids were being particularly rambunctious, and I told him he had to take them outside to get their energy out. He had them spend the next hour doing American Ninja Warrior on the jungle gym/playground. I hadn't even heard of the show, but it was a group of young boys like 6 to 12, so they all adored it. This coworker loved to get super stoned and watch it. Don't know if he was high at the camp, but he just got to sit on a bench and tell kids their time was getting slower when they did stunts, and they just scurried and jumped around faster. Herding yak with a drone takes the cake for me. They run from it and oddly fear it, which is surprising considering they have literally zero aerial predators. We only did it a few times because it really makes them uneasy and doesn't treat them well. But it is very effective and easy, and you can herd them from over 1/2 mile away from inside the house. Edit. I'm really surprised how much this blew up. I've never had so many post replies, but I'll try to get around to answering as many questions as possible. My post history is predominantly yakking off and tower climbing stuff, so I'd suggest going there if you're curious. Automated 70% of my job in a large finance firm as an intern. Never disclosed it and got paid easy money for 6 months. I spent the time doing courses and applying for my grad school. Got my admission letter during the final 2 weeks of my internship and never looked back. Pro tip: Python and Excel can be your best friend. Obligatory edit. I went to sleep and this thread blew up. Thank you for your stories, questions, and comments. I'm trying to get to as many as possible. During my intern, my professor gave me line graphs made on paper and asked me to find the coordinates by drawing horizontal and vertical lines. It would have taken hours if not days. I thought to myself, I couldn't be the first one who is lazy AF. So I googled it, found this cool free to use software web digitizer. Step 1. Scan the graph. Step 2. Mark the x and y axis in the picture. Step 3. Grab a beer cause you got the nicest MF graph that you couldn't have drawn by yourself in a million years. My professor was so happy she asked me to document the method and mail it across the entire department. Edit. I'm so sorry people for not replying earlier. I had no idea this would blow up, so I didn't bother to check Reddit at work. To answer your question, yes, I did share my original method with my professor and the entire department. 1. She was a really supportive professor and I wanted to return her favors, even if this software might have been the tiniest help to her work. 2. The original developer of this software made it available online for free. He could have made it a paid service, and believe me, researchers would have paid, because it is that good. But he kept it free for all of us to use, and it was my responsibility to share his work as much as I could. Worked in a huge hotel by the airport**. We had layover with over 400 people. I think we were 3 employees. They had buffet for dinner and then left to go to bed since it was 1 or 2 AM. Rule was, we should always go to the room and pick up as many plates as we could and then bring them to the cleaner. Took for ages and I wanted to go home. I decided to roll out the cart and collect the plates and put them on the cart. Guests were seeing it and started putting their plates on the cart when they left. All of a sudden hundreds of people cleaned up their own stuff. Duty manager saw it and I thought he would blast me since the hotel was a 5-star place. He just looked at me, smiled and said that's why I like to hire lazy people. They think of ways to finish work faster. I had an absolute bitch of a boss at a restaurant. This lady was trying to be promoted so hard and was just so extra about everything. She wanted me to count every salt packet, lid, straw, and packet of ketchup in any open boxes. Like I couldn't say 3 boxes and 3/4 of a box. I had to say 3 boxes and 872 salt packets. If I gave the numbers too quick she'd know I lied. So I'd come up with reasonable sounding numbers and then spend 10 hours playing Pokemon. Eventually I left and went on to bigger and better things. Went by them all years later and extra bitch was still there in the same job lol. I'm in corporate accounting and I'm the only one in my department with a CPA. Of course, I have to take continuing education for my license and I usually take as many hours of Excel courses as I can each year. By learning the keyboard shortcuts, advanced formulas, and a bunch of useful hidden features in Excel, I'm able to get most of my work done in less than 2 hours, then spend the rest of the day browsing Reddit and watching YouTube videos. Thank goodness our cubicle walls are high, or I'm sure they would fired me by now for being on my phone 6+ hours each day. Was tiling a bathroom floor. One young guy I was working with was cleaning up. When we were done, I told him to take the leftover tile back downstairs to the truck, and then went back to cleaning what I was doing. 10 seconds later I hear this huge crash, and then a softo, right. He had gone out onto the balcony and dropped them down to the truck, shattering over $100 worth of tile. He said he thought it would be faster. He wasn't exactly wrong. A few years ago my mom was tasked with fixing my grandparents' toilet while we were visiting for the holidays. The toilet reservoir was constantly filling and running, and thus flooding the bathroom because the boy arm wasn't lifting high enough from the water in the reservoir to switch off the water flow. My mom, who is normally a very practical person, had been tackling the issue for hours. She was pretty distraught, thinking we would have to order a new boy arm, maybe even a new sensor, or switch and pull the whole assembly apart to replace everything. She was planning out a trip to Lowe's and pricing things out when I walked in. I took one look at it and bent the metal arm the boy was attached to down, so the arm had a slight upwards curve. The boy still reached the same level in the reservoir, but registered on the sensor as higher because of the curve in the arm. Problem solved. Rangers lead the way. I watched it dawn on her what I had done, and she just looked at me like I had a third eye and said, "You little fucking shit. I've been getting my ass kicked by this thing for 4 hours and you fix it in 4 fucking seconds?" She was very happy I saved her from more work and spending more money. She calls me her little toilet engineer from time to time. I work on aircraft. It's mildly demeaning. Edit. And now my most upvoted comment is about a shitter I fixed once. Perfect. I remember having to peel 20 kilograms of charred eggplant at a restaurant I worked in. I asked the chef if there was an easier way to do it. His reply was, "Yep, get someone else to do it." My parents were having a summer get together a couple of years ago, and my dad wanted my brother and me to dig a small pit for a bonfire. He handed us 2 shovels and left us to dig. My brother went and started up our rolled tractor, drove it across the lawn, dropped the bucket into the earth and drove forward a few feet. The pit ended up a little larger than what we had planned, but once we lined it with stones it was actually a pretty nice pit. *EDITED my brother and I to my brother and me. My teacher not wanting to grade papers, so he gives us easy shit to do. A few years back, I was roommates with a super mechanically inclined dude. Our top-loading clothes washer stopped working well because the lid got a little warped and didn't trip the safe switch for the spin cycle to run anymore. He was all geared up to pull the washer out, take it apart, bend the lid back into proper shape, and reseat the sensor so it would run properly. I told him to hold off. I put a load of laundry in and popped a 1/4-inch shim under the lid. It ran perfectly. There's a story that I've heard a few dozen times about a toothpaste company that had accidentally sent out cases of their product that had a few empty single boxes of toothpaste. The company had endeavored not only to rectify their mistake, but to ensure they did not repeat it. They hired an engineering company that designed a scale and alarm shutdown system. If an empty carton was passed down the production line, klaxons would be triggered, and a full stop would initiate until the offending box was recovered, and an all clear had been entered into the computer system before production could resume. The company paid through the nose, but was ultimately pleased with their failsafe, and the engineers patted each other on the back. A few months pass, and the engineers returned for quality control. The toothpaste company reported 0 margin of error for weeks. Turns out, one of the minimum wage hairnet types on the assembly line didn't appreciate the sound of klaxons or working with computers. So, he or she had aimed a large fan at the production line before the scale that blew the lighter empty cartons off of the conveyor belt. Problem solved. I worked at a chain restaurant, and in my last few months there we got those stupid tables I asks that customers could pay at. There was a survey at the end of every transaction and our managers added new performance metrics based on how many people paid using the Xiask and also how well our service was based on the surveys. One asshole would just fill the surveys out himself after his customers left and gave himself 5 stars and everything. Dude was always ranked top of the servers. Fucking genius. Thank you so much for listening. Please support the channel by subscribing.